we just keep bouncing back to this comfort zone, we actually discredit how far we pushed ourselves out of the comfort zone before we bounced back, and how much has changed, how much wider that comfort zone has possibly become, how much shift we are actually in the process of creating. And this actually builds that self-efficacy that I talked about earlier, that belief that we can do the hard thing. Because if we stop discrediting the efforts we're making, it helps us understand that we're making effort and that change is happening and that actually change is inevitable.
Hello and welcome to the Real Success Show. I'm your host, Candice Mama. If you are looking for a way to cultivate your inner resilience, then today's guest is just for you. Her name is Komal Minhas. She's interviewed Oprah, being featured on NBC, and she is a resilience expert. I cannot wait to jump into this interview. But before I do, you know what I need you to do? Hit that like button, subscribe, and comment so that more people will find us. Now, without further ado, here's Komal. Komal, it is such an honor to have you on the Real Success Show. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here.
Oh my goodness, Komal. I've been doing so much research on you and you just blow me away with every article I find, with every piece of work you've done. And I want to know, how do you define yourself?
So I am a business strategist and resilience educator. So what I love to do is support startup founders, early stage founders in scaling and growing their businesses while not burning out, taking good care of themselves, and making growth in their business and their personal growth a priority. And then as a resilience educator, I help folks really lean into their own resiliency, their own strength, their ability to overcome adversity, and to really create more joy and meaning in their day-to-day life. All of this while also being a film producer, a documentarian, and a number of other things, including an angel investor. So I wear many hats, but these days, business strategist and resilience educator are the two main things.
I absolutely love that. There's so many things that you do, but I really want to focus on the resilience educator and business strategist aspect of who you are for now. And I want to know what led you into this field, because it is something that so many people need. And you mentioned burnout, which is something everyone has experienced, especially in the past 2 years. So what led you on this path?
Well, you often teach in the world what you most need in your life. And I was no exception to this rule. And so, with being a business strategist, I have been an entrepreneur since I was 21 years old. I grew up in a household that was very business oriented, focused on entrepreneurship. I'm a child of immigrants, and my parents started business very early in their lives. And so, I grew up seeing the ins and outs of brick and mortar businesses, of scaling, of recessions, of hard times. And so, with that sort of ad hoc education, when I entered my entrepreneurial journey, I realized I knew so much more than I could conceive of in that moment of what it took to run a business. But then over the last decade of my career, the roller coaster of it has led me to so many different types of businesses, business models, witnessing different business models, investing in different types of businesses. And in 2016, I actually produced a documentary called Dream Girl, a documentary film about women entrepreneurs in and around New York City. And we premiered it at the Obama White House. For that film, I was named to Oprah Super Soul 100 with my co-founder. And since that journey happened with Dream Girl, I dove even deeper into understanding business, hosted a podcast nationally in Canada where I interviewed over 50 women founders from across this amazing country. And from there, it just deepened and deepened. And I realized I know so much that I want to share with others, and I want to give to others to help them strengthen their business, strengthen their bottom line, improve revenue, improve cash flow. Now, business strategist over here as a resilience educator, I have also seen a lot of life over my entire life, from being a cancer survivor myself to navigating multiple burnouts to having just very difficult upbringing in an alcoholic household. I had this burning question inside of me when I was in recovery from cancer and a neurological illness in 2017 of what really makes us survive? What helps us be resilient? What helps us rise? And when I looked at my own recovery journeys, plural, and looked at the research around positive psychology and around resiliency, I realized that there was a pattern of what it takes for us to be resilient people. And that's where my research and framework started developing on the resiliency education side. And when you think of entrepreneurs, our mental health crises are higher than the average public. And so this intersection of resiliency and business strategy has been a beautiful zone of genius for me. And that's really how I came into it, was through my own lived experiences, deepening my understanding through research and talking to others, and then realizing this is the best way I can serve the world.
Wow. And you mentioned a few things in there that I really want to touch on. And, it's that difficult upbringing that you experienced and that you overcame. But, I think a lot of the time when we're thinking about difficult upbringings, we gloss over like, oh, I went through this difficult upbringing and then I became the success on the other side. But I want to know, how did that impact your self-esteem, how you saw yourself in the world, and how did you manage to navigate through the world with the upbringing you had?
Absolutely. I mean, for so many of us who grew up in difficult households, we carry a lot of those trauma stories, beliefs about ourselves with us to this day. I so value working with my therapist in helping me unpack a lot of these things, especially when triggers happen in my day to day life, when I go into shame spirals or trauma spirals. And it is a constant effort. There's no end goal, there's no end point where suddenly we're completely healed, because childhood trauma is the beginning point. Our adolescent trauma, our teenage trauma, our early 20s trauma, it all compounds over time. And so when I talk about being resilient, it actually comes with having various supports in your life that enable you to bounce back from these types of adversities. And what that looks like in my life, and what that looks like based on the research, is a framework I call the roots of resilience. So, in our lives, if we are connected to our culture and identity, especially for BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous, people of color, it actually helps us build our resiliency because we're connected to our culture, our heritage, our language, our community, and we have permission to do so. And so when I reconnected to my faith, to my culture, to my family, to my roots, to my heritage, I felt this blooming and blossoming in my life. And that's something that really enabled me to grow and to overcome a lot of that adversity, and allows me to have a home to come back to in myself that is faith and culture based. Another is our broader community. So who are we able to call? Are we calling the right people? I would so often pick up the phone, text, or call someone who actually didn't really want to be supporting me, but who I felt like I wanted love and attention and care from. So when I was able to course correct that and call the right people, the ones who really wanted to show up for me, it helped me build that resiliency. It helped me heal even more quickly in my life. I had to improve my relationship to work. I couldn't overwork. I realized that part of my trauma response was a work addiction. I didn't know how to stop because I never saw my immigrant parents resting and stopping. And so I had to relearn how to take care of myself. I had to improve my well being, my wellness, the habits and routines to take care of myself, not to be more productive, but to genuinely just feel happy and healthy in my life. Because at a baseline, we all deserve to feel happy and healthy in our lives. I had to get my physical space organized. I had to get my mind organized. I had to do planning and organizing. The research tells us that when we lean on task based planning, it actually helps us become more resilient. So, your to do lists, even though they feel overwhelming, are actually a tool for you to feel better and more aligned and alive in your life. And building this concept of self efficacy, you mentioned our self confidence and self esteem. Trauma, it at a baseline deteriorates our belief in ourselves. But the research shows us that there's tactical ways for us to improve our self-efficacy, that self-belief. And one of those ways is through listening to podcasts like this, vicariously taking in stories of others who have overcome adversity, thrived through challenges that you might be facing. And let me tell you, I did a lot of that. As a film producer, as a documentarian, I watched so many stories of other people's heroes' journeys, and that gave me the motivation and inspiration to keep going, especially folks who have gone through similar difficulties in their childhood, other cancer survivors, other folks who look like me. And so through all of these things, through this roots of resiliency, I realized it wasn't that I needed to like force myself to bounce back quickly every time, but it was, what was the fabric or the trampoline I was jumping off of made of? Did it have community? Did it have my culture and identity? Did it have this self belief, these ways for me to build this confidence? And as I grew up, I realized how I could do this tactically more and more for myself. But my self-esteem still to this day is something I'm working on. And I haven't met someone for whom that's not the case. So it definitely impacted my self-esteem having a traumatic childhood and life. However, I take the steps every day to continue moving forward in an even more resilient way.
Wow. So much of what you were sharing, I could relate with because I've got a similar background. And I was just thinking to myself, a question I receive a lot, and I'm also very curious about right now, is around how did you navigate from leaning into a victim mentality, which you could have very easily had, right? You come from these set of situations and then you get cancer, and you could have said, life is against me, I'm done, I'm just going to be a victim. And yet it seems very much like through your work, through what you do, how you speak, that you took that control. So what kept you from leaning into being a victim, I would say?
Mm. In the way that I was raised, I actually, and I don't think this was healthy, I wasn't given a lot of space to fully embrace the experiences I was going through. And what I mean by that is if something happened in our household, for example, I grew up in a household where there was two families living in one household. So my mom, my dad, my aunt, and my uncle, they raised my cousins in the same household and my brother and I in the same household, all 10 of us together. And my mom made sure when I was young that my uncle would never physically hurt my brother and I, but he was abusive with my cousins. And so the trauma I experienced was vicarious trauma because I would witness a lot of anger, aggression, abuse in the household. I would experience personally verbal abuse and different things like that. But physical abuse was not something I was subjected to, but I witnessed. And so when you're in that kind of a strange dynamic, I wasn't the primary victim in that situation, but I didn't have words or language to name the trauma that I was experiencing as a child. And so this stayed with me throughout my life where I would actually belittle the challenges I was facing. I was diagnosed with cancer, but it wasn't a severe enough cancer for it to be a big deal. I still had cancer. I still had to go through surgeries. I still had recovery, but I would actually just diminish the impacts of what I was experiencing. And I genuinely don't think that that was actually healthy or helpful because it prevented me from a lot of reckoning that could have happened in the moment versus after the fact and having to take time, years off of my career to recover. And so while I wouldn't say that being in a victim mentality or allowing yourself to like really live and see and feel the weight and gravity of what you've gone through, I think that's a natural part of a healing process. But we are not often given permission to do that. So if we stay there too long, it gets pathologized or made to look like or sound like a bad thing. But we have to actually like honor and hold the severity of what we go through, especially when it's traumatic. So as I get older, I'm able to do this in a healthy way in safe spaces with my therapist, with my husband, when I have moments and I'm like, this happened to me. And it's like I'm realizing it for the first time. So I would say that my survival instinct, my survival mechanism to keep going, and this learned belief that what was happening to me was never severe enough for me to truly care about it or for it to be a big deal, helped me move forward. And this is every story has the downside and the upside. Every part of us has that shadow side. But it gave me the ability to persist and now to hold space when others share with me the severity of what they've gone through, because I'm not going to be the person who denies the truth of someone else's experience. Now, that being said, we absolutely can stay too long in that state of shock and pain and turmoil and tumult that comes after going through hard things. And to move out of that stage does take practice, and it does take repetition, and it does take believing in yourself, and it does take feeling supported or finding support in the ways that you can. So that forward momentum we sometimes have to create, and that can be exceptionally challenging. But that's where this Roots of Resiliency framework can help support you in that leap forward. But for me, it was this like, oh, I have a weird belief around not being allowed to be a victim. And that propelled me forward, but it also held me back in other ways. How is it for you when you experience this?
I actually resonate a lot with what you're saying. I have the same framework. And as you said, everything's got its good and it's got its bad. And I think for me, it did also lean into that resilient spirit of, you just have to get things done. You're capable of just handling things. But as you said, and I think there was so much beauty in what you said there about, allowing yourself the freedom and the space to acknowledge when things aren't right and when you are going through pain, because I think the pathology you can get into is, oh, things have been worse, or things can get worse, or someone else has it worse. And so I started saying to myself and to the people I teach is, we are not in the pain Olympics. No one is leaving with a gold trophy at the end about who endured the most. So it's so important to validate that internal human experience. So everything you said is just so beautiful. And I also love the vulnerability at which you share your story, because that's not easy. And so I want to ask you, as you've started sharing and as you've, taught others to be more resilient, are there points where it takes a toll on you being so vulnerable and so open?
Brene Brown shares this of rarely do we see wounds in the process of healing. And what she means by that is, and it's something that's really informed how I share in the world now. I share the things that I've had the opportunity to process and make sense of, and that feels safe and comfortable for me. It doesn't mean I won't tear up in an interview or I won't tear up in sharing something I've gone through. That's a natural part of thinking about the things we've lived through, survived through. Sometimes they can be tears of gratitude. Sometimes it can be like, oh, that there is a rawness still there. But what I've had to learn how to do is safely share my vulnerabilities. And so when I can talk about the childhood trauma and the upbringing that I've had and the strange dynamics in our household growing up, it's with knowing that I'm safely in my home at 32 years old with a loving and caring partner, having built a life that's informed by that trauma, but is not defined by that trauma. And so it enables me to know I can share this in order to support someone else in moving forward in their life, but it no longer defines me or has a hold on how I perceive myself and how I live my life. And in fact, my own family has given me this permission of sorts, the siblings involved, to share it in the ways that can most help others, because we all saw and experienced and witnessed the severity. And you can sometimes make beautiful things out of that kind of pain and trauma. However, I will say that it takes a lot of self-care, um, choosing the right venues in which to share these things. Not everyone deserves or is deserving of the fullness of our truth, vulnerability, pain, and trauma. We have to choose the right venues when we feel safe enough to share those things. So for me, it's been a learning process. When I was younger, I was not as discerning, and it definitely caused a lot more pain. But now I feel like mature enough, well-informed enough, safe enough. I trust myself enough to know when and where I am comfortable sharing my truths and these vulnerabilities from a scar versus a wound.
Hmm. You said something so beautiful, and you said informed by the trauma, not defined by the trauma. And I think that is such a beautiful takeaway. And at the end there, you also said something that I really want to touch on, which is not everyone deserves the fullness of your story and your vulnerability. And I think that's so important. And I was speaking to Les Brown, and he was speaking about the courage to walk away from relationships that don't serve us. And so you touched on it a little bit earlier too, which is, speaking to the wrong people about your pain because you wanted them to be there. When did that pattern begin to shift for you? And when did you realize that this is not a healthy way for me to be sharing of myself?
It can feel very enmeshed because sometimes the people that we as adults don't need to trust with our stories or decide to not trust with our stories are the people we might have been closest to. So this could be family, this could be our closest friends. So it can feel confusing. It was in my mid 20s and after my cancer diagnosis, so like 27, 28, when this really landed home for me. And part of it is when you're a 20 something going through cancer, it becomes abundantly clear to you who is supporting you and who isn't, who's ghosting you and who's around for the wrong reasons. And that allowed the line to be drawn in the sand for me quite distinctly. And it also enabled me to build the courage and strength to know how I deserve to be treated and how I don't deserve to be treated. And there would come instances where there would be interactions with people I love who were used to speaking to me in one way, with a raised voice or with shame and belittlement. And in those conversations, I had to practice saying, people don't talk to me like this anymore. And so when you're ready to have a different type of conversation, let's start again. But for now, this conversation is over until you're ready to meet me in a different way. That takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of strength. I'm very proud of younger me for having the audacity, but not audacity, for having the ability to prioritize myself. And the relationships shift because you are setting a new boundary. You are setting new rules of engagement. You are determining a new way that you want your life to be lived. And at this point in my life, there are so few moments where I feel disrespected, where I feel someone is overstepping because of how well established those boundaries have become, those rules of engagement have become. And so it's practice, but I would say it was going through the trauma of my cancer diagnosis, being mistreated in my recovery, severely being gaslit by my co-founder, and then coming through that and realizing, you know what, I'm pretty awesome and I'm pretty proud of myself and I know who I am and what I deserve. And it's not that. And there comes a day when you can actually laugh at it, where you can say, how did I allow that to happen? And to move forward informed by knowing exactly what you deserve, because you deserve to be treated well. You deserve love and respect. We all do. This is a baseline. We've just been conditioned to believe the opposite. So we're reclaiming part of that. And I definitely had a huge reclamation journey with that.
You said to get the courage and strength. And I think that's the perfect, identification of when you're starting to form what I would call a new identity, because it was like, I am no longer this person, and therefore you are not going to treat me the way you treated this person. You have to change if you want to stay in my life, because these are the new rules of engagement. And, I always find the journey of transition so fascinating. And with you, it was this massive life change that happened where you shifted identity and you realized that, hey, I am powerful. I am awesome. I do great things in the world. I'm a good person and I don't deserve this kind of treatment. And I know when a lot of people come from tumultuous homes, that sense of identity, that sense of self-worth is always challenged. It's challenged by yourself, your thoughts, the way you interact with people. And so I want to know, as you were in that shift of identity, when did you feel like I've fully embodied this new identity?
Mm. I would say that it's in small moments. Like there wasn't a black and white day or like a one day where it all kind of hit. But it was in these collection of moments. I can remember the first conversation with a loved one where I drew that line in the sand. And I can remember it not even feeling scary, but just necessary. And so that was a very distinct moment of something fundamental has shifted and changed. And every day there's moments when I was walking with my father-in-law. We live, my husband and I, with my father-in-law, and we were walking in the back, and he grew up in an abusive household as well. And we were walking and it was so beautiful and peaceful. And he looks at me and he said, Coco, that's my nickname. Coco, we did it. And I was like, what do you mean, Pop? And he's like, we changed this for our generation. We changed this cycle for our generation. Because our one rule in this house is you do whatever the F you want. Like there's no one to police you. If you're not hurting anyone, we're okay. And everyone gets to live and be their full selves in this household. And that for me is a new identity, because that wasn't it. That 100% was not. I had to be everything, a box that was predetermined, pre-described for me. And to now have a life where it's fully on my terms is absolutely like the identity shift. So it's small moments every day. And that identity continues to evolve, because I still don't want to put myself in a box. There's still so much more for me to learn and grow and do. But that walk in the back was a big moment for us, where it just solidified, like, yes, we've broken a lot of cycles and we've changed a lot of cycles in our lives together.
Oh, When you said that, I literally had chills go down my neck because I think it's so beautiful, and it does take courage, it takes strength, it takes resilience to continue down a path that's very unfamiliar, but that you know is good for you. And I think that's just so beautiful for everyone because I mean, the past 2 years, regardless of childhood, I think people have had to collectively draw on a new strength and had to question, is this the identity I still want to live in? Is this the person I want to be? Is this the job I want to be in? Is this the person I want to be married to? And you were speaking about burnout as well, which I think is so actually intertwined with these boundaries that we have to set with ourselves, with others, with where we are in our careers. And I want to know your experience of getting to that point in your career where it was like, I am burnt out. I cannot operate at this speed. I need to pause and do things differently.
I was one of the people for whom my body decided that for me because I was 100% not going to choose that myself. Rest, taking time off, like this was peak hustle culture. This was peak the upswing of the influencers who are telling us to keep going and work harder and post more. And so 2017 rolled around and I woke up one day and I couldn't see out of my left eye. And I learned I had a neurological illness. There was a likelihood it could be multiple sclerosis. It turned out not to be, but I had to move from Brooklyn back to Canada, take full advantage of the public health insurance that we have here, the ability to have all my health issues covered, and to begin my recovery journey. And it took me a good 7 or 8 months for my vision to partially come back, and B, to kind of reorient my nervous system through lots of health related modalities, doctor's appointments, massages, cranial sacral support for my nervous system. And I had to do it they say New York spits you out when it's ready, and it certainly did that to me. You learn what you need to, and then New York is like, okay, it's time for you to either leave or stay. Now we fortunately have a cordial relationship again. I love going back to the city a couple times a year, but it was done with me and it booted me the heck out of there. But then I came to our beautiful property here, and the nature healed me. My routines healed me. The slow life healed me. When I had a neurological illness, as you can tell, I love talking. My brain is one of my superpowers: strategy, thinking, intellect, all these things. When I was at the peak of my sickness, I couldn't talk to more than one person at a time. I couldn't formulate my words, sentences properly. And so I thought, without my full cognition, like, who am I? And I was 27. You're supposed to just be living your life, carefree, doing the things. Not the case. And it forced me to reevaluate who I was, how I was operating in the world, what I valued about myself, what mattered most. And through that overhaul, through that really intentional recovery, I not only recovered from this severe illness, but also reoriented myself to prevent future burnouts. Have I burnt out since then? Absolutely. Has it been as severe? Hell no. I have learned how to notice it earlier. And if I choose to continue to push through it, I have my own burnout protocol. I have my next steps that I need to go through if it hits again. And it comes back to, again, the roots of resilience that I've created, because we create what we most need. And I needed this step-by-step formula for not just coming back from burnout, but any adversity in life. And so it's a journey, right? Like, so many of us, I don't know a person as well who hasn't gone through burnout. We're all carrying trauma, and we're all navigating burnout at one point or another. So I hope that folks feel solace in that, because you're not alone in the intensity of what you're going through. Absolutely not. And in that burnout recovery, it depends on the severity of which it's hit you. If it's like me and it's a full physiological happening through an illness, whatever it is, that may call you to a full pause. I fortunately was in a financial position to be able to do that. For others, it might be a couple weekends in a row. It might be taking 4-day weeks instead of 5-day. It might be having long weekends consistently. It might be changing that job, exiting that relationship, changing the physical circumstance around you. Our physical environment has a huge impact on our self-belief and confidence. There's tons of research around this. The more positive the environment, the more positive your ability to thrive and succeed. And so I had to do an overhaul of my entire life. So that's my burnout journey. That's the peak burnout journey. The smaller burnouts, like I shared, it's these small actions that can compound and improve things. But this is why the World Health Organization now has it as a formal diagnosis. We're all experiencing this because capitalism leads us to be in a productivity cycle that doesn't make sense for the way humans are created. But here we are prescribed to it. So we need these types of conversations to give us permission to rest, permission to have stronger boundaries with work, permission to lean into the type of lives that we want for ourselves, not the type that society is telling us to live. But I'm curious because you've brought it up a couple of times as well, like your perceptions and beliefs around burnout as well. I feel like I'd love to hear a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I love that you said intentional recovery, but I think something you brought up that is so important, and I think this doesn't get emphasized enough, is that what happens in our minds will eventually manifest in our bodies. And
Mm.
so I didn't really realize this until I was around 16. I know it's a little younger than most, but and it wouldn't be like burnout, but I think it was life burnout in the sense that I was carrying so much psychological trauma that my body started to just break down. And I remember the doctor at the time saying to me, if you don't change what you're doing, you're going to die. Your body can't sustain you. And, it had to be intentional. I had to get really methodical and serious about how I was going to live my life and if I wanted to stay alive, because I think besides just the mental, it's the emotional toll it takes, right? So emotionally you're not in the right place. Emotionally you're not feeling like I want to conquer the world. You're feeling as though like, what is my space in the world? Am I valued? You're asking yourself really deep questions. And so in my adult life, I think I'm better at spotting, but like you, I had to first get good with voicing my boundaries and voicing when I felt like the reciprocal nature of the relationship was no longer in alignment or in balance. And another thing you said, which I think is so important for everyone, is just environments. I think so many of us don't realize that the environments we put ourselves into, whether that's social, whether that's work, whether that is, your community, if that's not nourishing you, you are not going to bloom, and you are constantly going to be taking in the energies around you and start letting that sink in. Because as much as human beings, we're like, I'm an autonomous being and I just, march the beat of my own drum. Unfortunately, we also are part of the cycle that is nature, and we are part of the cycle that is humanity. And if too many frequencies around you, I believe at least, aren't at a high vibration, or they're not bringing your vibration up, then eventually you're going to be the one that sinks. Because if enough people are negative, it does bring down that positivity, at least in my viewpoint and in my experience of it. So I'm very passionate about speaking about the physiological nature of our minds, because I think sometimes we think, oh, my thoughts don't affect me, Kamal. Like, it's just like a little bit of this, and it's a little bit of me telling myself I'm not pretty in the morning, or that person will never love me. But it really does impact how you carry yourself, how, your confidence and how you speak to people, your body, how your body starts to like slouch down because you're like, I'm not good enough. So it impacts everything. And I love that you've developed this incredible technique that walks people like step by step on the journey. And I'm curious to know, what does your life look like now?
Mm.
Because it sounds like you've got it, it sounds like you've got it pretty figured out.
Thank you for that. I like to think I've got it pretty dialed in these days, which feels phenomenal to be able to say. I think my younger self would be very proud of the life we've created all these years. And coming back to what you said about environment and emphasizing how we've been talking about environment, I think back to younger me, and I think back to the bedroom that I had and the way I made it my sanctuary, and how that room in particular in my house, regardless of what was going on outside of my door, I was able to create a space of peace, possibility, fun, and joy, even if there was shouting happening downstairs, even if I had just witnessed something really intense. I knew I had my bed and my room to go to. And so when I think of when I walked out that door, however, there were so many variables I couldn't control. And so as a young human, and even as adults, when we're in unhealthy environments, There's so much force and pressure in a negative environment that you are trying to counter. And that takes so much effort and energy that in a healthy environment can be redirected to growth, to possibility, to career, to potential, to whatever it is. And so if you're in that negative environment and you're wondering, why am I not able to do X, Y, and Z? Because of the amount of energy it's taking you to simply be in a positive state, to simply try and counter what's happening around you. And when you put yourself and are able to put yourself in safer environments, the potential grows. You realize that that energy can be redirected. Sometimes there is an overlap of, anxious or depressive periods because you're suddenly taking all this energy that you had to push a negative force around you to now redirect it to more positive, and your brain's like, what are we doing here? um, but I've been able to learn how to amplify that and how to really cherish the fact that I don't have to work against a negative force in my life anymore. In fact, I just get to compound the brilliance. I get to compound the joy. I get to compound the love, the connection. We live in the middle of the countryside on a beautiful acreage. Our friends and family come to us because they know this is a nourishing place. They call this the retreat because we can go for our walks in the forest. We can sit in the big, beautiful lounge living room area we've created in our cottage style home. And they know that they can just unplug and fully be themselves here. And so what I've been able to create is what I always wanted, was a safe place for me to just be. And now other people in my life get to enjoy this safe space as well. And all the communities and places I create online, I try and embody that for my audience, for my community, for my clients. I'm the safe place you get to land and just be yourself. And so life right now, the more I can enable this in the world, the more I can create this safety, this place to just be you fully with all of the joy and brilliance that we all bring to the table. That feels like fun and nourishing and exactly it. And that is what I continue to try and do in the world and be in the world and embody in the world. And so life right now feels really great. It feels like I've created an environment that helps me and my family thrive. I've created a travel schedule that supports the needs I have of being in the city because I'm, it's lonely in the country at times too. And to just be surrounded by love and people who challenge me to make me better and feel the limitless possibilities of this life, while also knowing comfort is allowed and stability is allowed and groundedness is allowed. So that's what life feels like now. And I'm certain younger me would be very proud of this life we've created.
Oh, she would be. And it's so interesting because I was just like, my cheeks are starting to hurt. And it's because I didn't stop smiling since since you started answering. I was like, this is amazing. And, I love that you speak about the sanctuary you've created for yourself and the sanctuary you aim to create for others, because I am such a big believer that we are responsible for the energy we bring into a space, whether that be online, in our personal environments, in our friendships, in our intimate relationships. And I think when we take accountability for the energy we're bringing, the energy we're creating online and everywhere else, it starts to like work its way out, and people start associating you with that space of comfort, safety, empowerment. And it comes from a subconscious level. It's not always conscious why people are like, I just want to go see what Kamal's up to. They don't know why they're doing it, but they know they want to do it because a part of them knows it's going to feed their soul. It's going to bring them comfort. It's going to bring them peace. And I love that. And, Kamal, you mentioned something which I think is so important, because you were speaking about, this energy that you push outwards because you're so used to navigating these environments. And I think something that comes to mind for me is, our comfort zone is not necessarily where things are comfortable, but it's where we are used to occupying. It's where we're used to being. It's our like pre-line setting, I'd say. And when all of a sudden we have to take the risk of being new, the risk of doing something else, the risk of leaving that partnership, the risk of, whatever it is, so much fear sets in and we want to go back to that baseline of chaos that we used to. Did you face that? And if so, how did you get through that?
Mm-hmm. This is something that is such an interesting thing to observe because we all want to be better. We all know the things we need to do to improve. And the comfort zone can feel so comfortable. And our brain can convince us that it's the safest, rightest, that's not even a word, smartest, best thing for us to do. And I have 100% been there. And sometimes it is, we might need a little bit more time in that comfort zone. You might not feel fully safe to take this risk, because taking risk takes a lot of courage, coming back to our conversation of courage. Risk also takes feeling supported, like taking a calculated risk versus just ripping the Band-Aid off and leaping. Certain things can be done earlier in our lives, teens, 20s, mid 20s, taking that Band-Aid off and just leaping, quitting the job without the safety net, leaving the relationship without a plan in place. There's a time and place where that feels much more possible. As you get older, there's more on the table. There's more risk. There's more you have to consider. There's mortgages, there's payments, there's all of this. So sometimes the reason the comfort zone continues to feel so comfortable is because we didn't create the bridge to the risk. We didn't create the bridge forward. So what I love to do with my clients and with myself is, if I feel something feels impossible, it is, what is the plan? What are the inflection points at which I can actually take this risk? How much savings do I need to have set aside so that I can do 3 to 4 months of the side hustle, freelance, or whatever business I'm building, and take that leap and leave the job? What is my transition plan to exit this relationship safely and comfortably for me? Are our finances intertwined? Is this something that I need to decouple emotionally slowly over time? But when we feel like it has to be all or nothing, all in a moment, there's moments where that's true. The quantum leaps people take, the big changes in life, the making the decision. But what we often forget is, before that huge shift in life, there likely was a transition. There likely was a series of happenings that enabled them to finally feel ready to do the thing. I know this to be true in my life. It can feel like it's only a moment, like you asked me earlier around boundaries with family, with being in a new identity. But it was practicing over and over again, smaller conversations, stronger lines in the sand, then the big conversation where I can distinctly remember it, and then the continuation of that change. So I think sometimes when it feels like we just keep bouncing back to this comfort zone, we actually discredit how far we pushed ourselves out of the comfort zone before we bounced back, and how much has changed, how much wider that comfort zone has possibly become, how much shift we are actually in the process of creating. And this actually builds that self-efficacy that I talked about earlier, that belief that we can do the hard thing. Because if we stop discrediting the efforts we're making, it helps us understand that we're making effort and that change is happening, and that actually change is inevitable because humans are here to grow. And so for me, moving through this is to keep persisting, continue moving forward, continue showing that grit, and then having fun with the risk. Because at the end of the day, on the other side of these big decisions and changes is more freedom, more joy, more abundance, more power. When this negative energy we're trying to move away from, which is often the case when we want to move out of our comfort zone, when that dissipates, like we talked about earlier, there's so much more space for possibility.
Mm.
So let's inject the fun in these risks again, the courage, the pride of the courage, the saying and remembering you're awesome. These are things that we need to bring back into the equation, and it doesn't need to be so Puritan and negative and hard and difficult every step of the way. Changing yourself and taking these risks can be fun. And I'm saying this because I also need to remember this.
I love that you said that. And I love it because I think so often, sometimes, what I've had to question myself in is, am I running towards something or am I running away from something? Because those two things tend to have very different feelings and they tend to come from very different places. When I'm running away, it is very much all or nothing. I'm very much like, okay, I'm out. And usually it's because I don't want to have the difficult conversation. So it's not about like consciously uncoupling or about having that negotiation of like, hey, these are the things that make me feel uneasy in this position, or, with this job offer or this contract. So instead, it's like, actually, let me just run away from this, because if I do, I can justify that it was always terrible. But sometimes it actually takes more bravery to stay and say, I want to make this work. if you are willing to make this work, or at least I want to talk through this. And should we not come to an agreement that benefits both of us, then I'm going to leave. And the energy you speaking about at the end there about running towards something else, that is fun, right? When you're running towards something and you know that when you take this giant leap forward, you're jumping into freedom, you're jumping into adventure. And I think so much of this human experience, we forget that we're supposed to have fun. Like, it is a finite experience. We weren't here to like live, pay our bills and die. We were supposed to like laugh, eat the good food, have the adventures, fall in love, fall out of love, like it's a continuous adventure. And I want to know, where is this adventure taking you? Because you sound very aligned. You sound like you're very happy right now, but are there these big goals that you are still aiming towards?
I absolutely continue to dream big and have these bigger dreams and visions for my life. And I feel like we might have this shared passion for hosting, for interviewing, for connecting with people. And so I find my intellect and my strategist brain and that complexity of what my mind likes to do gets so satisfied through coaching, through working with my clients. And it gives me the freedom, the financial freedom and ability to now consider my entertainment and media career and to say, how do I want to develop this? Are there shows I want to develop? Is there something fun I want to try and pitch and host? And to do that with a lot more comfort and safety, because as we talked about, when we're trying to take risks, we do need a bit of a comfort zone. We do need a cushion to land on. For some folks, if they're all or nothing, bless them, it works really well. I used to be also like, let's just go. But again, risk profile and tolerance shifts as I've gotten older and have survived certain things. And so I would say, like, where this journey is taking me, I hope, is to continue to amplify and build this platform through which I get to talk about these things with folks. I get to see people's hearts. I get to hold space together for us to feel like we can be fully ourselves and show others that it's possible for them as well, in business, in life, in love, in work. And so I hope to continue to just build and grow and influence and support more and more people in the months and years to come. What does that look like specifically? I'll leave that to God, to the universe, to co-create with me. I don't need to put a label on anything, but just feeling ready for more and creating more space for that to be welcomed in.
Oh, I love that. There's so much of who you are that I just resonate with so much because, I feel like somehow in some alternate universe, we're living in alignment.
I
But
feel that for us, certainly.
but you've already interviewed, I mean, some incredible people like Oprah, for example. I mean, come on, the queen of the interview. But are
I
they
will clarify, I was fortunate to be on the Super Soul 100. I have not
superstar?
interviewed Oprah yet. On
Yes.
the list over
Yeah,
there,
no, we're already putting it out there. It's coming
putting
to
it out
you.
there.
You know what? I'm
But
such a believer. What you seek is seeking you. So it's going to come into
yes,
alignment. It's just about universal timing. We can control a
yes,
lot of things. We cannot control God's time. But I want to
yes.
know, I've already put it out there with Oprah. Who are some people that you are dying to interview and have conversations with?
So I did have the incredible opportunity to interview Michelle Obama on her book tour before the pandemic. And so having an hour on stage with this incredible, brilliant, world-changing human um, really changed my life and changed for me what was possible in my own mind. And so when I think about these dream interview lists, or like who I would like to speak to, I think it comes back to the quality of the conversations with anyone, because what Oprah did on her show was she talked to all of us, everyone who was living their regular life and regular quote unquote. There's just so much that we can unpack through our shared experiences together. I will certainly say that, there are some women politicians who are on that list for me. It would be incredible to be able to interview Meghan Markle one day. That would be a dream on my list as well. Policymakers, change makers, advocates. So to just continue to use conversation as a way to uplift, inspire, and inform people and to show them what's possible for them and to just, like I've shared before, like hold that heart space together like you do. Like this conversation has been so wonderful, and the show that you host and the conversations that you lead are so impactful and so powerful. And that's why this audience loves to come back week after week. But it's beautiful because what Oprah was able to do for a generation of us is to show us the power of conversation and the power of holding important space with people. And so the more of us that do this, the more connected we might all feel to one another. And so, yeah, it's not a specific list of people. I've named a couple of humans, but it's truly just being able to keep doing this feels very surreal. And I don't know how that feels for you, but do you sometimes in the interviews or interview prep just feel like, wow, like this, how did this conversation even come to this point? Or how did we get here? This is just so awe-inspiring. It's like every day we get to go to school with people that we admire. And that's like, there's nothing better than that.
Honestly, everything you said just is on the money. I'm completely with you about, I think dialogue, and I've always believed this, that dialogue has the power to change the world. You know, for me, when I think about my journey through growth and moving through life, I think it was the conversations I overheard, it was the conversations I saw, it was, you know, stories that would come to the surface. And so I remember when I was younger, I wanted to be a CNN journalist in war zones, because I always used to think, if I can tell these people stories and people can hear, we'd realize that we're all so interconnected. And so who is in pain in Iraq is the same as someone who's in pain in your household. We just need to be connected. And I think interviews and stories have that power. And like you said, you know, it's always like, every time I do an interview, including this one, there's so much I'm learning, and there's so much I'm just like, I get to do this. Like, I am having this conversation right now. How lucky am I, you know? And I grow through every conversation. So there's that element. And I want to know for you, is there any interview you've done, or, you know, one that sticks out to you as like, wow, this really shifted my perspective?
I will absolutely say it was that opportunity to interview Michelle Obama in front of 8,000 people in a sold out stadium, and to walk on that stage and to feel like I belonged as a child of immigrants to Canada, as a girl who grew up in a small city, Grand Prairie, Alberta, who decided that there was a bigger life for me. And then to take that stage with a former first lady, a historic former first lady, to talk about grief, to talk about loss, to talk about the impact that we all deserve to make on the world and can make on the world, to talk about her passions, her beliefs. When I asked her about losing her father to multiple sclerosis and her best friend to cancer within a short period of time, she shared that as she moves forward in her life, and I'm sure that this is something we all want to do, is to live a life that those we've lost would be proud of. And it was those losses that made her leave her traditional law career to enter a more civically minded, impact minded career path for herself. And so when we hear these stories from public figures who we admire so much, like she took that leap, that grief led her to take that risk, to make that change in her life, to transform who she was in that moment. And that's why her memoir being called Becoming is so impactful, because we are always in this state of becoming. We are always transforming. The box is ever changing. The identity is ever shifting. And we have permission to do that. And so that interview really was left an indelible mark on me to show me what's possible. And it really filled my cup before 2 years of isolation of a pandemic. So I will say I'm super grateful for that side of it as well, because I will have those images, memories. They got me through the hardest of days during this pandemic. And that was the one for me.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And we are drawing to an end of our conversation. But before we do, I've got two quick fire questions for you. And the first one is, what is real success to you?
Real success is like deeply loving your life. Like if there's moments in your days when you just like tune in and you look around and you're like, this is my life. Like, this is my life. How amazing is that? Like, that is success. If we're like constantly in the rat race and chasing and going, and we don't know how to, you know, be present for those, the most important moments of our life, which are like right now, which are the embrace with your partner, the conversation with your parents, with your siblings, with your children, that is success. And to like, success comes from that feeling of deep appreciation comes from reconciling the reality of your life, being okay with the path forward to get to your goals, and then learning how to soak in the journey, because it's not the benchmarks that are going to make us happy, but it's the process of achieving those benchmarks and knowing how to tune into the journey. And I think for a lot of us, we get lost in that, and it leads to disappointment. But success for me is loving my life and the moments of my days.
Oh, that gave me chills, like in Greece. They're multiplying.
Yes. I'm going to listen to that now after this interview.
Oh my goodness.
So good.
And the final one is, what is something about you that we will not find on Google?
Ooh, okay. I love tequila. So I don't drink a lot, but the reason this comes up is my best friend got married a couple weeks ago, and I was emceeing the wedding in Brooklyn, and I would, great night. Everyone loved like the fun, the hosting, the games that we did. I DJ'd as well. And then after, we went to a dive bar, and I was like, okay, I can finally like really enjoy myself. And I hadn't drank in a long time because like we're alone in the pandemic. Like I like to do this with my friends. It's like an activity I like to do there. And someone brought out the shots of tequila, and I was like, this is a love language. This is truly a love language for me. And so that's the memory that came up. Like, thank you for asking that question. That's something you cannot Google about me, but is a very like important part of my identity. No, I'm kidding, but it's a fun thing. Tequila is my love language, one of my love languages.
Oh my goodness. I just watched you and I was like, oh my goodness, you are my spirit animal, because
when are we going to do shots together? This is perfect. Talk life, work, business.
Exactly. When
dance.
we meet in person, we are dancing and having tequila, because I always joke and say, I don't drink much, but when I do, it is tequila.
Are we the same?
I feel like we were separated at birth, but it's okay.
Yes.
It's okay. We found each other again.
We found each other.
Oh my goodness, Komal, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a blast.
Oh. I had the best time doing this interview. I want to know what stood out for you. Remember, every time you comment and let us know, we know which guests are best to serve you. It has been my greatest honor to serve you this week, and I look forward to doing it again next week.